So go ahead and start.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and with me is Armin Navabi, as you all know, the founder of Atheist Republic and the author of. This is a special episode that we're doing. It's a public live stream. It's an Ask Us Anything episode. So this is where we answer your questions. If you're a patron, a supporter of the podcast, and if you'd like to become one, you can just go to secularjihadist.com and you can become a patron for for as little as $1. Our patrons actually submitted pre-approved questions, so we're going to go through those. But for the rest of you, if you have any questions, please feel free to type it into the YouTube live chat, and we'll see how many we get to. We have a lot of questions today, so let's see how far we get.
And apologies again. Sorry again. What happened is today I posted the wrong link, and now we updated it, so we had some technical difficulties. I'm just going through everywhere to make sure that everybody's getting this one. Okay.
The right one. So
the right one, yeah.
So yeah, Armin's gonna take care of that. In any case, yeah. So we'll get started as soon as Armin has all that figured out.
It's all figured out. It's everywhere.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who is a supporter of the podcast. And by support, we don't just mean the patrons. The patrons will thank you very much. You know, you really, really help us keep going. And for everybody else who shares these episodes, who's been listening to the episodes, who've been talking about them, telling your friends and family about them, I think that that has helped. I mean, this has been, so far, 2018 has been amazing. We've had some incredible guests. We've had Sarah Haider. We had Alishba. We had Nick Cohen. And Nick Cohen, that episode's going to be out next week. We had conversations with 2 conservative Muslims, one fundamentalist Muslim and one conservative Muslim. And we had an episode on male circumcision with Brian Earp. And it's just been, we've just had some amazing conversations. Tanya Joya, the ex-wife of the leading ISIS commander, which was a particularly riveting episode. So if you've missed any of these, please do go back and check them out. And we just plan to continue going. Some upcoming announcements on April 23rd, which is a Monday. We're going to have Mariam Namazi on the podcast. She's coming up. I've talked to Jerry Coyne recently. We're going to be doing an episode on science and faith, and sort of having a sophisticated conversation about science versus faith with Jerry Coyne, the evolutionary biologist who many of you know. So it's going to be an exciting couple of months ahead as well. Meanwhile, there's a lot going on as far as Armin. Armin and I are both part of the XMNA, Ex-Muslims of North America college tour, the Normalizing Dissent tour. So Armin just had an event with Sarah Haider and Ghada, who was also a previous podcast guest, in where were you, Armin? In Kansas?
Yes.
So, and that was on April 8th. So I think that the video or the audio for that will be out shortly from XMNA. I am, if you're hearing this, if you're watching this live, then I am actually going to the Netherlands next week for the Dutch release of my book, the Dutch translation of it. So I have 3 events in 3 cities in the Netherlands. I have some media stuff I'm doing in Brussels as well, so I'll be there as well. And hopefully I'll come back in one piece. It's going to be pretty exhausting. The week after that, April 29th, I'm at Harvard for the Harvard Humanist Hub with Muslimish. And another event I wanted to announce is on June 2nd in Toronto. Greta Vosper is organizing an event which will be about the ex-Muslims or secular people in the Muslim world who are fleeing persecution. So it's a charity event to raise funds for them. I will be speaking. My wife, Alishba, who you heard on the podcast earlier, is going to be speaking. And Bonia Ahmed, the wife of Avijit Roy, who was one of the bloggers who was just unfortunately brutally murdered in Dhaka in Bangladesh. So she's going to be speaking in Saf Heather, the wife of Raif Badawi. She'll be speaking as well. So it's going to be a really, really incredible event on June 2nd in Toronto. So if anybody's around, you should come over there. And yeah, there's a lot going on. We're gonna put up announcements for all these events soon. So yeah, there's a lot happening this year that we're looking forward to. And I think, yeah, Armin, do you have anything else you want to add before we?
Let's go. Let's no more promotion.
You're done with all your technical stuff.
No, you overuse the promotional event, so I'm not going to promote anything.
Well, that's I know. I guess we're blessed. Is that the right word to use for this podcast? Blessed. In a way. I mean, we've been having a really good year. We're just having some really interesting conversations, and we're really getting the word out there. So,
but okay, guys, but give us a feedback on the promotion all stuff. Do you guys want the promotions at the beginning of the video or at the end of the video? Because I think I'm not sure, because once the YouTube version of this goes out, right? I heard it's a better idea to put the promotions at the end of it, because people that don't know you, they take the first 30 seconds to judge whether if this is going to be worth listening to or not, right? So I think it's a good idea to put the event. I mean, it's not promotional because it's basically events and stuff, valuable other content, right? But I think I don't know if you guys have feedback on this. Let us know.
I just look at it as stuff we're doing, but anyway, that was a good point. So let's dive in. Let's go with the questions, Armin.
All right. Well, I'll send you a whole bunch of questions that we got from our Jewlover patrons.
Yeah, so we have different. We should probably clear that up if you're talking about people who haven't heard this.
This is Yasmin's names that she came up with the patrons, and we liked it so much that even after she left, we didn't want to change them.
Right.
And every time we use these names, we remember her. So that's why we want to keep it there. So Jewlover was that our $10 patrons and up.
Right.
Wait, no, actually, I think this was for everybody. This was for Mossad shoe and up. Yeah, so everybody that is Mossad shoes and up sends us questions, and I sent you the questions. Do you want to go? Some of the questions were very long.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So we'll have a fun discussion. We've got some time. So I'm going to dive right in. Our first patron question for tomorrow comes from Brian from Mythicist Milwaukee. Many of you know Mythicist Milwaukee. They have a conference coming up. I think MythCon 5. I don't know if I recall, but exactly the right number. But anyway, here's a question. I'd like to know if you think recent events have cost Linda Sarsour credibility, like her Women's March openly supporting Farrakhan.
Wait, she had credibility?
Oh, that's part of the answer, Armin.
Oh, okay.
So like her Women's March openly supporting Farrakhan. That's Louis Farrakhan from the Nation of Islam. She seems terribly anti-Semitic and doesn't seem to be friendly with apostate Muslims. Do you think she will lose support from the center left? So to start with this, I'll kind of build on what Armin said, is that I don't really think she has a whole lot of credibility beyond her echo chamber right now. A lot of mainstream media outlets and personalities have criticized her heavily, and this includes the New York Times, includes Jake Tapper from CNN, who heavily criticized her for supporting. I think there was an activist who had murdered somebody. And I can't remember the exact details. So she supported that, her support of Louis Farrakhan, all of this, the anti-Semitism, the tweet that she had about Ayan, her CLE, and taking away her vagina, and saying that she wasn't a real woman, just really, really vile stuff. So I don't really think that Linda Sarsour has a whole lot of credibility. She's kind of going to has-been territory anyway, and my personal view is just to ignore her. I think
no, but the question was specifically not about us, but it was about the center left people.
Yeah, the center left. Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about like some of these mainstream media outlets, like the Washington Post, like the New York Times, like Jake Tapper from CNN. All of these are generally center left or left outlets, and they're pretty influential voices. And I think that I've actually heard personally from a lot of people on the left, some people in the media who are influential, that they don't particularly like her a whole lot, and they don't like the game that she plays. They think she's very manipulative, and it's actually unfortunate because I think the Women's March is an amazing event. I think it's an amazing idea. I think it's much needed. Unfortunately, it's been tainted by all of this sort of political, all the politics that people like Linda Sarsour and some of the other founders of it have brought to it. And I hope if it does continue, the Women's March, I hope it becomes more divorced from that sort of petty kind of politics. There have been other things as well. For example, there were reports of non-hijabi Muslims who were discounted from the event. They were discouraged from participating. There was a clear report of pro-life women, whether you agree with them or not, who should be in the Women's March because it's a women's march. It's not it's not something that it's supposed to adhere to a certain ideology. And they were put out of the event as well. So there have been many grievances from, not just from center left or right, but from just many different points in the political spectrum who have found Linda Sarsour and some of the other co-founders to be not very credible when it comes to the event. So
all right, I think you answered that one.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next one, because I want to go through the Patron questions so that we could also address the live chat questions. Guys,
Sure.
the live chat questions, I'm going to copy and paste them so that once we go through the Patron questions, then we could answer them. I don't know, but just for regards to Linda Sarsour, I just do think that people, I think it's very... A lot of people on the left don't like hearing this, and again, not hashtag not all. I always have to say this, not all the left, because every time we criticize the left, people on the left are always like, "I'm the left and I criticize Islam." Yeah, okay, yeah, not all, but there is a problem on the left. The thing, we told people that if you're not consistent with your values, if you don't support women that are being oppressed by Islam, even if you don't support them, if you're being a hypocrite and actually supporting oppression of women in Islamic countries, at the same time calling yourself feminist with regards to women in Western countries, this is going to hurt your credibility. People are going to dismiss you as an true activist, even if you mostly care about women around your area for the sake of credibility and for the sake of consistency. If you're not going to say anything about women elsewhere, that's fine. You could have your focus, but at least don't support oppression of women elsewhere. And if you see activists in your camp that are actually doing that, call them out. Don't make them leaders of your movements. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose credibility, and it's going to hurt the movement and the values you're actually fighting for.
All right. Can I add one more thing, Armin, to that?
Right.
I just want to talk about something. Just quickly quote Nick Cohen on something. So Nick Cohen, he was on our podcast. His episode's going to be out next week. Well, I mean, depending on when you're listening to this, if you're watching live, it's going to be out next week. And he actually said that there's a big difference between defending the rights of people to practice their beliefs, so defending the rights of women to wear the hijab. But on the other hand, there's a difference between that and celebrating or endorsing it, which is, I think, something that people in the Women's March and many people on the left get confused, and they conflate the two.
Right.
Okay.
So what's the next one?
Okay, so going on, the next question is...
How about this? How about so that we get through the questions, we just identify which one of us two is better to answer which question, and then one of us answer it, and then we go to the next.
So this one's actually directed. It says, "Hi, Armin." So this is from Gareth. And
it's two questions, one for you, one for me. So yeah.
Okay. So this is... Do you think that mocking religious beliefs reduces suffering in the world? If so, why?
Oh, that's just for me? Okay.
Well, I mean, he said, "Hi, Armin." I think he wrote to you, but it could be for both of us. I have a short to it, so...
Yeah, I mean, okay, here's the thing. I do think it really depends on the people. I do think that mocking religion is totally fine. And actually, a lot of people that responded to mocking, you manage to get people's attention through comedy. I mean, here's the thing: people call it. People that don't like it call it mocking. People that like it call it comedy, right? But comedy is one of the best ways to reach out to people. And I think it's totally fine. I think the only thing when people are complaining about it is most of the time is in the content is showing up in places that they had absolute control over whether they were going to be exposed to it or not, right? It's much more easier than ever for you to completely decide what kind of content you're exposed to. So if you find mockery of your ideas, something that you can't handle, it's up to you to limit access to it. For us, I don't, some people say mockery works, some people say no, mockery doesn't work. It really depends on the individual and the person that you're targeting. And I think, mockery is basically another word for comedy. And I think comedy is a very effective tool at trying to, we have many people on the Atheist Republic page that saw stuff that they were offended by because they considered it to be a mocking of their ideology, and they got involved in trying to defend it and call us out for why this is wrong. And they told us 3 years or 2 years or after a period they were like, okay, I'm an atheist. This is not something that is, this is a story that is not rare. We hear this a lot of times.
Very common. Yeah, it happens.
Very common. Yeah.
Like people come back a couple of years ago, they're like, okay, it makes sense to me now. I was very offended before, but I thought about it, and now it's 2 years later, and I'm with you. And
right.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's not just religion. Socialists mock capitalists, capitalists mock socialists. Muslims mock Christianity, Christians mock Islam. The thing is that the mocking, is meant to grab the attention, and then you go in and you debate the topic. Then the mocking of it is just a surface. It's just a conversation starter. It might not be very accurate, but then whenever you post a meme that is funny, that is the main content that you see is in the comment section. You know what I mean? Like, you start a conversation, you get some people riled up, you get some people trying to defend it, and then the real content, the real discussion and debate that you will see, you see a meme that has like 4 or 5 words on it, and then you see hundreds and 400, 500 people commenting in the under it, and that's what the real discussion is happening. So I really think it's a really effective way of starting a conversation.
Yeah. One thing I want to add to this, and I actually feel very strongly about this, is I think that it's incredibly important. I think satire and humor and mockery, those are very, very important, particularly for the people who are targets of them. So I'm going to give you an example. I mean, a lot of these people who are the targets, who are being criticized, the last thing they want is to not be taken seriously. So you take the example of, for example, Kim Jong-un of North Korea. He's a leader. He's reading, everybody's writing serious op-eds talking about North Korea as a serious threat. He reads them and he's like, wow, I'm a player on the world stage. I'm just like everybody else. I'm causing havoc. I'm making an impact. Then Seth Rogen comes out and makes a movie about him getting his head blown off. And suddenly he loses his shit. And he goes down and he gets hackers to, hack into Sony and hack into movie studios, get the movie shut down. That's something he takes really personally. Take the jihadists. They want to be taken seriously as players on the world stage. You draw cartoons of their prophet, you make fun of them, they go nuts. Right? Same thing, Donald Trump. You criticize him all you want. He's being criticized every single day. But when someone makes a joke about him, like Jay-Z or like Rosie O'Donnell, then he has to strike back. He can't hold himself back. So I think one of the things is when you see these elements, these personalities, they really they're very, very insecure, most of all, and they dread being mocked and being satirized, and for good reason. So I think it's a very effective tool. And you look at late night shows, you look at all of the stuff, and these things are actually places where people get their news now. They get a perspective that is unfortunately missing from the mainstream media. So I think it's very, very important.
One thing I actually actively look for is mockery of atheism. I think it's very interesting to see what they come up with. And it's a very, whenever I see Christian or Islamic pages mocking atheism, I think that's fantastic. I take that and I post it on Atheist Republic and see how people on Atheist Republic respond to it. It's a fantastic conversation starter, and it actually is an eye opener to what they see, what other people see ridiculous in atheism. I welcome that a lot. So it's not just us against them. I welcome mockery of anything that I believe in or don't believe in. Go on.
Yeah, and one really important thing is that if you're going to be doing it, if you are in the field of having provocative conversations, and we know many people who are, I've noticed a lot of these people, they just freak out when they get it in return, and you have to do that. If you're playing, if you're in this area, and if you're doing this kind of work, you have to be able to take criticism back and have a sense of humor about it as well. You have to have a bit of a thick skin, and that's, I think, good advice for anybody who's in activism and dealing with controversial material.
But the people in the live chat, if you, I'm trying to copy all your questions. So after the Patron questions, we get to your questions. If you tag secular jihadists, because there's also conversation that is happening between people in the live chat, so I might miss your questions. So make sure if you have something that I need to pay attention to, you actually tag secular jihadists. Anyways, go on.
Okay, so the next question is from Alex Govin. And it's a little long. There's a question for you and there's a question for me. So I'm going to try to summarize it a bit, Armin. So it says, Armin, you often explain your preference for promoting leaving Islam altogether as opposed to reform or substituting another ideology like nationalism. And there's two parts to this. Number one, have you found that this option is much more viable for young people as opposed to middle-aged and older people who spent their whole lives as Muslims and either feel it's too late to change their mind or are simply too entrenched in the ideology, community, or culture that they simply cannot or will not part with their beliefs? So yeah, for what age group do you encourage reform, or leaving Islam? What do you think it's better for one age group rather than the other? The second part is your preference for leaving Islam completely as opposed to a more piecemeal route is justified by the assertion that any other ideology, nationalism, reformed Islam, etc., is still a bullshit story. And then he goes on to talk about Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens, that most human activities based on these narratives, human rights, secular values. Hold on, let me just skip. This is a long question, Alex, so I'm going to...
I think the second part is trying to stress on the importance of narratives.
Yeah, the importance of narrative. So let's, I think that kind of summarizes it. So Armin, go for it.
I don't think it's okay. I don't think young or old makes a difference. I don't think we should be lying to people, knowingly lying to people, right? It doesn't feel like, if you basically is trying to sell Islamic reform to people, you're basically saying to young people, maybe for them it's more effective to tell them to maybe consider leaving Islam or leaving religion or leaving dogma or superstition altogether. But maybe for old people, we should suggest reform. Just to be clear, when you're suggesting reform to Muslims, you're basically lying to them. You are lying to them. You are basically saying that as an atheist, that this is absolute horseshit. This book is not divine in any way. But you're deciding to tell people that these verses from God could mean something else, which it doesn't. So basically, you're saying these people are too old. They're too married to their ideology. So let me just lie to them. That's what you're saying, because they're too old, or too, it's too late for them. And I don't think that actually that's true. I think for all people, doubt has always worked more effectively. And not that people say, oh, reform also encourages doubt. I'm not saying doubt in what this verse means. I mean doubt in the whole, with the whole thing is bullshit or not, that kind of doubt, right? I think everybody, if people are looking for baby steps, replacing one bullshit with another is not a baby step in the right direction. It's just basically continuing in the path of deluding people. I think if you're looking for baby steps, skepticism works very effectively. And the skepticism that you're looking for is anybody, no matter how long they have been married to these ideas, all you're suggesting is it even possible that you were wrong? That's all you're suggesting. And I think that's the most effective. That's the most effective thing to do with young people, with old people, with people that have been religious for all for a long time. The thing is that the other method is lying to people, and I don't suggest you lie to people. With regards to the importance of narratives, narratives are very important, and but the role of narratives in us, learning moral lessons from narratives or being inspired by it does not have to involve believing that they actually happened, right? For example, a story like Harry Potter has a lot of messages hidden in it, a lot of moral lessons, a lot of inspiring messages. Or there's a lot of other stories, or ancient stories, even the Quran and the Bible. The Quran and the Bible are very interesting works of history if you don't believe in it. The problem is that if you actually think, see, Harry Potter is it is made a lot of young people start reading books. It's a very interesting way. It has influenced people, a whole generation of young people's way of looking at things, and made a lot of these kids actually go out and read other books because how inspired they were by it. But imagine how worrisome it would be if we had a whole bunch of these people actually believe that these Harry Potter is real, Voldemort is real. Some of them started worshiping the Voldemort. That would be that would be an issue. That would be a that would be something that we need to address. I think narratives do admit there are many stories in history that have influenced people's behavior without having to sell it as reality. Does that answer the question, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good answer.
Okay,
it's comprehensive. So I'm going to move on to the next question, and this is, something I think this is an excellent question. This is also from Alex, and this was specifically directed to me. It says, Ali, you've spoken about being a free speech absolutist. Whenever this position is defended, I always hear the phrase "sunlight is the best disinfectant." It's a great metaphor, but it's still just a metaphor. I was wondering if you could bring it into much more concrete terms. How does bringing ideas into the light disinfect them? This seems to rely on a truth shall set you free sort of principle. And then he goes on, I'll just summarize. He goes on to talk about how when you do that, when you bring all of these ideas, you end up getting people believing the wrong narratives, and you can have sometimes lots and lots of people believe these wrong ideas. So how should we address it? He says, while I don't mean to question free speech in principle, how can we be so confident that it will truly lead towards the truth and not the opposite? In other words, to continue the metaphor, we can explain the chemical process that is disinfecting. I am wondering if you can convert this explanation back to the sphere of free speech. So yeah, it's a bit of a complicated question, but I think it's a really good one. So I am a free speech absolutist, and this is what I've said, and this means that I think that so far in the world, the United States has the best conception, the idea of free speech, and one of the key elements of that is that hate speech is protected as free speech. So, just to give an example, the Westboro Baptist Church, which these are the people who go and they have those signs that say "God hates fags," and they picket the funerals of slain soldiers. So these people, there was a Supreme Court case, some years ago, about whether they should be allowed to picket these funerals, and in an 8-1 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that yes, they should, because it's part of their free speech. So even though this was hate speech, this was covered under free speech, and I think that this is very important. Now, as far as this whole idea of and the reason I think that's important is because I think that when you're talking about people's freedom of speech, you're not just talking about their freedom of speech. You're talking about your freedom to hear what people are saying. It's your freedom to decide for yourself what ideas you want to be exposed to and what ideas you don't. That's not something that you want to outsource. That's not a responsibility you want to outsource to the government or to some administration in a university. You want to be able to decide that for yourself, and I think that that's actually a very, very important right for people to have if we're going to have an open society where there's a free exchange of ideas. As for people believing all the fake news and everything. I think that that's a, you know, that's an unfortunate side effect of people being able to say what they want to say, but you can't go about restricting that. That just comes with it. And a lot of times it isn't even hate speech. I mean, you look at how influential religion is in the world. You look at how influential, for example, a lot of the alt-right narratives and the neo-Nazi narratives have become, and how they're coming back to the mainstream, into mainstream discourse now after, after 2016, pretty much after the election. And I think this is a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I don't think that these narratives have just started emerging recently. I think they've always been there. They've just been underground. And what you're doing is you are actually bringing them into the light. You're exposing them to sunlight, so that people are exposed to them. They know they exist and they can actually counter it, not with censorship, not with banning, but with more speech. They're encouraging dialogue. And what happens if you don't do that? If you fire people for saying the wrong thing, or if you financially ruin them for saying the wrong thing, they won't say it, but those ideas will still fester. They'll just go underground. They'll go back in the closet, and then they're going to come out later at some point, and they'll be stronger than ever before. And
okay, you need to answer. We're getting questions faster than we're answering them. So,
so I want to add one more thing to that, connecting to the narratives aspect that Armin was talking about, is that I think that when we talk about these things, Albert Einstein once said that, the truth is, I'm paraphrasing him completely, but truth doesn't, you can say all the truth you want. It doesn't matter if nobody's listening. And people listen to things when they can relate to them. If there are stories, the reason religion is so successful is because it wasn't just information; it was false information, but it was presented through stories. That's something people relate to. If you look at the 2016 election, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton was full of all of these policies and ideas, but it didn't resonate because she didn't have a story. She wasn't authentic. Donald Trump, even though a lot of the stuff he said was bullshit, he had a story. There was a narrative to what he was saying. So that is a very human thing. And the one thing that I think that we should do is talk about data, talk about information, talk about facts and truth, but frame them in a way that people can relate to them, and I think it'll be a lot more influential.
Actually, to that point, that's a very good point, because the fact that narratives work and they're a very effective way of communicating doesn't mean that what they're communicating is worth taking seriously, right? And that's why just people say, well, we should give credit to religion because people need narratives. Yeah, they did a very good job at spreading their ideas, but they're very harmful and dangerous ideas. And their effectiveness makes them even more dangerous. So yeah.
And then the flip side is that when you do talk, just because you're talking about data and you're talking about facts, that doesn't mean you have to dismiss the narrative or the emotional component of it. Doesn't mean that you can't take those things. Like, I was raised with a lot of homophobia around me when I was younger. I was born in the 70s, in my school, comedy shows, TV everywhere. And then I think the movie Philadelphia with Tom Hanks completely changed that for me. When I saw it in an artistic form, in a story, I realized, this homophobia thing is bullshit. So that's one example.
Another thing to point out, when I say we could learn from the Bible and the Quran, I by no means I mean that we could learn moral lessons. These books should never be taken seriously ever, but as moral guides. What we could learn from them is history. We could do some detective work and see which verses came from where. There's a lot of interesting history behind all of them. I wish there was more Bart Ehrman related work on the Quran, like Bart Ehrman kind of work that he does on the Bible. I wish there was more work like that on the Quran. It's very fun. I always tell people that Islam is a lot more fun as an atheist, because as a Muslim, you look at the Quran as a guide to life. And that's bullshit. But as an atheist, you could look at it as a historical document that with full of puzzles that need solving. So when I say we could learn from it, by no means I'm suggesting that it's at all has any value of morality. It has zero. There's nothing in any of these books that is and I'm seriously saying nothing in these books that are worth using as a moral lesson.
Okay. So next question from another patron. This is from Eric McIntyre. His question is, have you read Kanan Makia's Republic of Fear about Saddam Hussein's Iraq, and what do you make of it? Also, what do you make of Christopher Hitchens and Nick Cohen's support for the Iraq War, which were largely based on Makia's arguments? More broadly, when the cause of anti-totalitarianism and the cause of anti-imperialism are in direct conflicts, how do you prioritize them? Armin, you want to go, or since I took the last one?
So we're talking whether there's a whole bunch of
questions. The book, but I think we can talk about. I've heard the book. I haven't read it.
Yeah.
But he says, what do you make of Christopher Hitchens and Nick Cohen's support for the Iraq War?
All right. So I think they were wrong, but here's the thing. It's so for me. I know some people might disagree with me. It's so obvious for us to see that it was wrong, but we're looking at everything from with hindsight, right? I don't think it's as easy to understand these things before they happen. Like, a lot of people make it seem like a simple, obvious mistakes. To be fair, if from all the mistakes, this seemed to be one of the most obvious ones that the U.S. shouldn't have made, because there were a lot of people that warned the United States what will happen, exactly what happened, that there was warnings about that these things will happen. And one of the main people that was warning United States about exactly what's going to happen after removing Saddam, it was Saudi Arabia. And I'm not there's nothing, I'm not saying Saudi Arabia is right. I mean, they were right about this, right? But that doesn't mean I'm supporting them. Fuck Saudi Arabia's government, okay? Just to make that clear. But they knew what's gonna happen after they're removing Saddam, and they were very scared about, very worried about this, because they were worried about Iran. At that time, United States was completely ignoring Saudi Arabia, because their friendship was at its lowest point, given that the 9/11 hijackers were mostly Saudi. I mean, they were still considered allies, but the relationship wasn't as good at that time. What Saudis were warning United States was that you're basically giving Iraq to Iran. You're giving it to Iran. And that's exactly what happened. The thing is that when we're talking about foreign policy, it's a lot of people simplify it as, I mean, sometimes I do it as well, Iran versus Saudi Arabia versus United States. But what we have to understand is that in all these countries, there are a lot of different interest groups with different agendas. United States is not just one entity. There are many different forces in each one of these countries that are fighting for different goals and agendas, so it becomes more. So when we say, the consequences of the Iraq War was bad, we have to say to who exactly. Like, it was great for Iran. It was really bad for Saudi Arabia. It was bad for U.S. taxpayers. It was really great for U.S. weapon sales. Right? It was really good for the U.S. military industry, and every and so this is not a conspiracy theory, okay? Like, the influence of the weapons industry in the United States politics is pretty obvious and straightforward. This is not conspiracy theory level stuff, okay? They have powerful lobbyists. And actually, the level of influence of different groups on U.S. I mean, okay, when I criticize U.S. foreign policy, we have to understand that is still better than many other countries. Okay, so United States makes a lot of mistakes, but they're still much better compared to countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia. And people might try to count bodies to say, no, United States is worse. But you have to understand that if Iran or Saudi Arabia had the same power of United States, then the numbers would look different, right? But so United States makes a lot of mistakes. And the problem with the mistakes that it makes is that to the people that have those influences, sometimes they're not even considered mistakes. Just one example is there's a terrorist group called Mujahideen Khalq, which recently was removed as a terrorist group because they were very good at lobbying different groups. These are people that have killed a lot of innocent people. They used to be funded by Saddam, and now they have they're called MEK, and these are the people that are actually supporting and funding people like John Bolton, which is now in such a powerful position to make. I mean, these are people that are actually have a lot of interest in attack against Iran, for example, right? And whether if you think attacking Iran is a good idea or a bad idea, it shouldn't be influenced by groups like this. You have to understand that countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel, they want an attack on Iran, for example, right now, but they don't want their soldiers or their tax money to go towards it. They want the U.S. tax money to go towards it. And whether or not this is a good idea or bad idea, you have to understand that this is not how decisions for United States tax money should be made. And with regards to Christopher Hitchens, of course, the guy wasn't. He's not infallible. I love the guy. I love many of his. He was fantastic, and we lost him way too soon. But on this, obviously, because you can see, I disagree with. There was something else I was going to say. Did I address?
Yeah, there was one more part to it, Armin, where it said that when the cause of anti-totalitarianism and the cause of anti-imperialism are in direct conflict, how do you prioritize them?
So and another thing, one thing I was going to say about the United States, and when they say imperialism, are they talking about United States versus?
Yeah, they're talking about like imperialism. I would assume so, because the whole idea is that attacking, striking against Iraq.
This is not imperialism. United States is behaving just like any other country would if it was a superpower. In fact, they might be causing less damage than.
That doesn't mean it's not imperialism, though. I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying
it's not imperialism because they're not because they're not actively controlling these countries. But here's the thing: United States makes a lot of mistakes, but at the same time, we have to remember that United States is the first country to show up at anywhere that there's a disease outbreak. At any place where there is a natural disaster, United States, and like when there was this storm, when there was this disaster typhoon in the Philippines, United States was the first country to show up there and the last country to leave. A lot of there's many disease outbreaks would have been a lot worse if it wasn't because of the influence of United States and them showing up there. So the number of lives United States have saved in different countries is way higher than the number of people that have been killed because of United States influence in these countries. That doesn't mean that it justifies them, especially when you consider that the entities, the forces that are responsible for helping when there's a disease outbreak or when there's a natural disaster are completely separate from the ones that are making mistakes, or sometimes they're making good decisions, right? You have to understand that United States intervention has not always been bad. Look at Japan, right? Look at
Germany,
right? Look at Indonesia. For a while, it had a very powerful effect when the United States get involved in their economy. If it wasn't for United States, a lot of countries in the world would be communist right now. And
I think this really is a not just a case by case thing, but there's so many variables here. And I agree with most of what Armin just said, and in fact almost all of it. But I would add one thing, that a lot of this has to do with how things are done. So, for instance, right now there were many people who supported the Iraq War initially. And then people like Fareed Zakaria, for instance. But now that looking in hindsight, they're saying, well, because of the way it was done, this was a very bad idea. On the other hand, supposing you had a rewrite of history and supposing the war had been done very well, a lot of the mistakes hadn't been made. There was more information. They were more well informed about what the Iraqi the local regional politics was like with Iraq and what all the different groups wanted. And they had gone in with those insights. And supposing it had been a success, if it was a success, maybe a lot of people who were against the war before would have now said in hindsight, it was probably a good idea. So I think a lot of this really depends on how these interventions are conducted, why they're conducted, and what the outcome is.
Just to point out, there's no country that doesn't intervene in other countries if unless they couldn't. Okay, Iran intervenes in other countries' affairs. Saudi Arabia intervenes in other countries' affairs. All the European countries. The reason why we notice it more with the United States is because the United States is more capable of doing it. But if those countries were also more capable of doing it, they would do it. The thing is that it's not. Countries do see national interest in. They see a lot of national interest in actually going out and doing stuff outside of their border, and a lot of times without being welcome to do that. But every country does that, and whether it's fair or not depends on what you think the role of the government is. If you think the role of the government is to protect its citizens, a lot of these then you might be able to justify it that these countries are going out and trying to solve problems before it comes home and affects its citizens. But it's fair to point out that sometimes actually this backfired and the problem became much worse. But coming up with examples like that doesn't mean that the whole idea of trying to solve problems before it comes home is complete false all the time. You could list a lot of examples that it actually backfired. You actually created terrorists that came out and attacked you, but you could also come up with examples that it actually helped, right? Right now nation building is a dirty word, but when it came to Japan, when it came to Germany, now these are United States best allies, and the stability in those regions has benefited United States and those countries a lot. So you could come up with good examples of how one intervention that you might come up with example of. A lot of times also people have a lot of focus on what examples they see as bad. For example, this whole PC culture and anti-imperialism narrative makes people always think of the Middle East when they think of the United States negative role when it comes to intervention. But nobody mentions, not nobody, but not that many people mention Cambodia. I never there's Cambodia is one of the worst examples of United States intervention, and the number of people that died from that is mind blowing, and I don't know why it doesn't come up as an example. But anyways, I think I spent a lot of time on this. But go on. Next question.
So let's go on to. Do we have any more patron questions, Armin?
No, I think let's go to the live chat questions. I copied and pasted all of them for you, right? So
okay, go for it.
No, I'm gonna copy more. You go from the top. I'm gonna go grab a few more from the chat. You could read. Do you see them? You muted.
I'm muted. Yeah, sorry. What were you saying?
I'm saying you go ahead and read the first ones that I copied and pasted. I'm gonna go and try to see while I was talking if I missed.
Okay, so the first one is from Sagan Worshipper. He says thoughts on the Ezra Klein Sam Harris podcast. So Armin, want to go for it?
Oh yeah. Oh my god. Did you listen to that? That was a fucking disaster, wasn't it?
I have ideas on it, but you go first, and then I'll talk about it.
Okay, you're making me go first.
Yeah, all right, so 1 second.
All right, so now Ali's not gonna hear what I have to say.
I can hear you. I can hear you. I'm here.
All right. Okay. So, so it looked bad for Sam at the beginning until the podcast actually happened, and I think that was Sam looked a lot better on the podcast. Here's the argument from the other side. Here's the whole summary. Okay, so first of all, how many people actually? I'm assuming everybody knows what happened. Ali, can you give a summary? I'm not good at giving summaries. But okay, let's just go over the general narrative.
Okay, hold on. Actually, the summary is going to be really, really complicated right now.
Okay, let me just give you the summary of the whole narrative. That it's not just between Sam and this Ezra. Is that how you say his name? Yeah. All right. So basically, here's the argument, and it's not just in this podcast. This is what people say. Some people come and say IQ is influenced by genes, and then the other side comes and says, how could you say that? What about slavery? What about oppression of black people? These things have an influence too. You can't ignore these things. And like, yeah, but first of all, that's a completely separate topic, but you can't deny that genes have an influence on IQ. Sorry, so you say genes have an influence on IQ, and then the other side, is that what I said, or at the beginning? All right, genes have an influence on IQ, and the other side is coming and saying that black people have been oppressed in the United States. We have a history of slavery. We have a history of this. We have a history and it's completely irrelevant to what you're saying. And they say that you can't just say that without actually acknowledging our history. And I'm like, why do we have to acknowledge that history? It has nothing to do with what we're saying. Okay, the fact that genes influence IQ has nothing to do with what you're saying. Why do I have to acknowledge that? In fact, if I acknowledge that, that would look ridiculous, right? That would look ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So if that means that anytime I want to mention something that has anything to do with with the relationship between genes and different races, which is science, which is fact, which is out there, and everybody knows that it's out. I mean, everybody should know that it's out there. Does that mean that I have to get a history lesson before every time I want to talk about it? Why would I have to do that? I mean, what? So first of all, notice how Western focused these arguments are, because you're talking about different races across the world. You're talking about the white genes, your genes in the white race, and the Middle Eastern race, and the Asian Far East races, and then the black African races. And these people just focus on the relationship in the United States between white people and black people, and that's all they care about. All right, and they think like, okay, this must be because of something. It must be because of something else. We cannot say this is because of genes, because if we say it, then we are basically giving into the narrative of the history of all this oppression and injustice against black people, and we're helping that narrative, right? Look how fucking focused these people are on their own countries, right? Because you're talking about the entire fucking planet, right? And these people think that when we cite black people, you're talking about just the United States black people. And the history of how white people treated black people must explain this, as if the whole world is in the United States. Okay, so somebody's saying Armin has no clue what he's talking about. Okay, steaks are tasty. Explain that to me. Let me actually see. Yes, Ezra was a disaster. Mike was saying, Mike is agreeing with me. We are, but he's right. Okay, so Crypt is saying he is right about Ezra that he's US-centric. Ali, where did you go? I can't read the live chat and respond to it at the same time. So steaks are tasty. You're saying I have no clue what I'm talking about. So explain it to me. Why I have no clue what I'm talking about.
Hey, sorry, I'm back. I'm having a little bit of a computer issue, so let me just I'm going to be about 30 more seconds. Okay.
All right. You just basically waited for the most controversial topic, and you just let me handle that with that.
I know. I'll be back very soon.
Yeah. All right. So, guys, it would be an absolute fucking miracle if different races had the same average, not just IQ, whatever metric you come up with to measure people's intelligence or capacity to do anything. Okay, art, to do math, to do science, to do anything. If the average IQs were actually equal, that would be a fucking miracle. Like, that would be a mathematical, that's mathematically impossible. How is it that we know, we can say that different races are capable of different things when it comes to everything else other than the mind, other than mental, other than IQ, other than intelligence? We know that these races are faster, these races are taller, these races are more likely to get heart disease, these races are more likely to get this and that. But all of a sudden, when it comes to your brain, all of a sudden, nope, they're all fucking equal, and everything that is not equal has to do with environment. Nobody's denying the role of environment. Of course, environment has a role. The only thing that science shows, and we would, even before it showed that, we should expect it to show that, because it would be impossible, it would be a mathematical miracle if it didn't, is that IQ and intelligence is also one of these things that are different between different races. I think the conversation that people are having is that they think different IQ levels means that some races are superior to the other races, or some people deserve more rights than the other, right? That's a problem. The problem is that people are, for example, let's say,
Oh, Armin, your mic just went silent from my end. Yeah, Armin, you're having mic issues.
How long has this been happening?
There you go. No, just for a few seconds. It's fine. Go ahead. Go back.
All right. I'm saying that even if we show some races are more intelligent than others, that doesn't mean that they're superior. Superior in what way? What does it fucking mean? It's okay. If you're talking about superiority, you're talking about what? You're talking about, do they deserve more rights? Do they deserve to be treated better? Do they deserve to be, in fact, I would argue it would be the other way around. I would think that if, for example, if it's proven, I mean, I'm not for these policies, but if there was ever any argument for equal opportunity, right? If you wanted to give people equal opportunity, then if it's shown that there are certain groups of people that are at genetically at a disadvantage, I'm not talking about equal outcome, I'm talking about equal opportunity, then some people the logical response to that might be that the people with the disadvantage deserve more rights and more protection. Right? So in fact, it would be the conclusions would be the other way around of what people are actually are afraid of.
I think that there are two elements to this, right? The first is there is the
it's funny how people always, when they disagree with you, instead of making your arguments, they just say, oh, go read more about it. You don't know about it. They don't make their arguments. They just refer you to other things. If you have an argument, make your argument.
Yeah. I think that there are two aspects of it. And here's the thing. Like, I like and admire Sam Harris a lot. I think he's coming from a very honest place, and I think he has a very good understanding of the science. I also actually really like Ezra Klein, and I've been reading him for a very, very long time. He started out, he's a very, very intelligent guy. He started out when he was just in his 20s, so he's almost like a prodigy in a lot of ways, and he was always very brilliant, and he got success very fast because of his ideas. So but he's very good when it comes to policy, and those are the two. I think both of them are kind of looking at it from their own view. So the one thing that we had with, for example, graduate students is, if you're studying one protein, if you're doing biochemistry, you're studying one protein, everybody kind of looks at all of biochemistry through that project that they're doing. I mean, I remember this in grad school when I was doing biochemistry. So I feel like that's what they're doing. They're looking at the same thing from their own professional angles.
Wait, so okay, people are saying that's not what Ezra said. Ezra said a whole bunch of stuff. Okay,
I know he did.
One of the things that he specifically said, I'm not addressing everything he said. He made some good points. I agree. One of the things he said is that when you're saying these things, you have to bring up. You can't just say it by yourself. You have to bring up the history. You have to mention that every time. Okay.
Well, he's not just talking about that. Yeah, he's
I
talking
know
about.
he's not just talking about that, but people are saying that's not what Ezra said. That is definitely one of the things he said.
Yeah. So
Definitely.
that is
I'm not saying
exactly.
that's. I'm not saying. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. You were saying that's
No,
exactly.
I'm saying that you're right. That is what he said. He said that you can't divorce this completely from the policy, and I do see that point to some extent. I think that what happens is that it comes to the earlier question that when you do expose certain truths out there, and here's a problem with these IQ race differences is that even if you're doing a general study on something, on just intelligence. If you're just looking at the genetics of intelligence, which is a strong topic, intelligence obviously has a genetic basis. You give somebody an extra chromosome, their IQ drops 30 points. You make a little mutation, their IQ can drop 30 points. So this is there definitely is a heritable and a genetic component to intelligence. Now, the question with race differences is that even if you're not studying it, they start popping out of the data. When they start popping out of the data, and there's a lot of agreement on this. There's even agreement from Ezra on this. I mean, this is something that everybody acknowledges. The only question is how do you deal with it? And I think that's where the issue is.
The issue, okay, the issue is that we need to talk about this more. We need to talk about not less, okay? Because we are at danger that a lot of people associate that higher intelligence with the fact that a race is superior to another race, right? If we don't talk about this, then the main people that are going to be referring to science are going to be
right.
It's going to be white supremacists. It's going to be white supremacists, and then the white supremacists are going to be pointing at science, and non-white supremacists are going to be like, no, deny science. We can't let them take this to. We have to be like, okay, just because different levels of intelligence doesn't mean that people have different levels of right, or that people should be treated differently. Your capacity to think is not the condition that we have for protection and rights. Your capacity to suffer, your ability to suffer, is the main reason why you deserve protection and you deserve to be given rights. Not your capacity to think.
No, I get all that. I think what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get into what I thought about that conversation, the exchange. Okay. So first thing is one place where I 100% agree with Sam Harris is that the very first article that came out, the Nisbet, Turkheim, and Paige Harden article, I do think that was a hit piece. Okay, so I think that was, they made some points in there, sure, but the way that it was framed, the context in which it was framed, there was clearly an agenda that they were trying to get across, where they were trying to target that. And I actually, that's one thing I completely disagree with Ezra Klein on, where he defends it. I have a feeling that maybe he's defending it because it's in Vox and he can't openly say anything about it. But he was very, very evasive when it came to questions about that one piece. So that's one thing I would say. When it comes to the second piece, go ahead.
Just regarding Sagan worshippers, saying Ezra, that's actually another point that Ezra made that I disagree with. Ezra is saying that we have to acknowledge facts because slavery has worked its way into the lead of the pencil of the person taking the IQ test. Then if that's the case, then why do black people in the United States have higher average IQ rates than black people outside of the United States then? Say again. If it's because of that.
Well, I mean, that could be explained environmentally too, because they're exposed to different environments. So the whole point where Ezra Klein does have a point, I think, is that I do think that all of this stuff, like what he said about Charles Murray, when Charles Murray talks about this, Charles Murray talks a lot about policy. In fact, most of his conversations are about policy. So I think one of the things that people are conflating is Sam Harris's point of view and Charles Murray's point of view. They're looking at it as, okay, Sam Harris and Charles Murray think exactly alike, but that's not true. What Sam Harris's point is, which I agree with, is that you have the data, you talk about the science, you have to talk about it responsibly, you have to acknowledge that it exists, and the right people have to have the conversation about it. Otherwise, as Armin, you said, the white supremacists basically go in and they hijack the dialogue. On the other hand,
if your IQ, if it was proven that my IQ and the race my IQ was lower than somebody else, who the fuck cares? Just work with whatever the best.
No, but that's a problem. That's a problem where people do. So the thing is, I don't care. You may not care, but the thing is, people
we should. Yeah, that's what we need to change. We need to change this fast before the science becomes undeniable. We can't let people. We can't let people start ranking different races based on how worthy they are and how superior they are.
I'll tell you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So here's the thing. IQ differences between different races do exist, number one. Number two, those IQ differences are probably attributable to part genetic, part environmental.
Right.
What's not sure, what nobody knows, and this is really something that nobody knows, is how much of that is environmental and how much of that is genetic. That's something nobody knows.
Yeah, we don't know, but all we're saying is all we're saying is that obviously genes is a factor. That's all we're saying. Yeah.
The other thing that people don't know is how mutable these are. Mutable as in how changeable these are. So when they talked about the Flynn effect is basically this idea that environmental factors and historical factors actually influence IQ. And one of the very powerful things that Ezra Klein mentioned in his second article, not the first one that I think was a hit piece that he was being evasive about, but in the second article, which is true, is that the black-white IQ difference has actually significantly closed by about 25% since 1972. That's 3 years before I was born.
Some people attribute that to also race mixing as well.
Yeah, but again, it could be race mixing, it could be everything else. But in that short a span of time, there isn't enough time for race mixing to account for that.
But the thing is that if you're focusing on that, I think it's a way to try to not say things that are uncomfortable to say.
No, I don't. No, I don't. I think I disagree with that. I think it's a way to complete the conversation.
And a lot of people point out that variance between individuals is way more than is a lot more, so that we should still judge people individually, and that is very true. But the fact that every time we mention that the averages are different, somebody has to say that. Is because people don't want to say uncomfortable things without actually adding something like, "Hey, everything is rainbows and butterflies," or like, don't.
So that part's established. People are uncomfortable about having this conversation. That part of it, I agree with you on. What I'm trying to say is that I didn't see that conversation as a disaster. I actually thought that it was
No, it wasn't a disaster. It was great for Sam.
No, and this is the thing. I think it was actually good for both of them. I benefited from hearing what Sam was saying.
I totally disagree. Sam was constantly saying something. He was completely ignoring it and responding to something.
I don't know what. There were parts of it where they were speaking past each other a lot. Okay, and
I think no. Sam wasn't speaking. Sam was constantly saying, "I don't know why you said that. It had nothing to do with the point that we were discussing." Sam wasn't talking past him. Sam knew exactly what he's saying. He ignored what Sam said and responded to.
He was
playing games.
So here's the thing: in the email exchange and in that very first article, whenever he talked about that article, he was being completely evasive. He was trying to almost avoid talking about it. In fact, I got the sense that he knew that first article was a hit piece, but he just couldn't say it because he supervised that article, and they.
Can I just add something? If we go by these standards, every time we talk about the Arab race, as a Persian that was invaded by Arabs 1400 years ago, I demand that we always talk about the historical context and tell that the Arabs mention the Arabs' imperialism and the oppression of the Arabs of the Persian people. Every time we're talking about the Arab race in the United States, we have to bring this up because we have to put everything.
I get that. I just need to let me just get out this complete thought. Okay.
All right.
So I do think right now, the one thing, again, it's established that obviously intelligence and IQ results specifically have a genetic component. It's true that these racial IQ differences exist. It's also true that there is a strong likelihood that there are both genetic and environmental components to them. In fact, it would be surprising if there weren't both of those. And the only thing that we're not sure of is the percentage of genetic and environmental. And I think that when it comes to things like the Flynn effect, when it comes to the closing of the gap, I think that this is not something, that part of it is not settled science. And when it comes to that part of it, right, I do think that looking at forget about the policy implications, forget about that. I'm talking about the actual science. Look at the influence of the history of slavery, the history of segregation, the history of disenfranchisement, the history of actually keeping Black people uneducated, keeping them, for hundreds of years, for centuries, right?
Right.
For doing that. There's right now, we don't know how that affected
but let's say
environmental component. So the idea that it's completely immutable and that this gap can't be closed in the future.
Okay, but let's say there was a scenario, okay, that I know this scenario is not true at all. It's not true, okay? But let's say this was the case. Let's say that there was no Flynn effect, and the gap would never have been closed, and that the variances were actually very small. Okay, in fact, we almost had a guarantee that blue people are smarter than purple people. We almost had a guarantee. Okay, let's say this: we lived in a world that was the case. Okay, blue people are always smarter than purple people, and there's nothing you can do to ever bring them together. Let's say that was the case. In that scenario, I still think you should not only I think you should treat blue people and purple people equally. Some people might even make an argument that you should treat purple people better than blue people because they're at a disadvantage.
So Armin, like that part of it again, I agree. I don't think whether there's a difference or not, right? Whether there's a difference or not, whether it's mutable or not, you can't apply bell curve statistics to individuals. And we did this as a cancer pathologist. I know that I never looked at 5-year cancer rate survivals, right? The cancer survival rates, which is a very common metric, and never applied that to an individual patient because every patient is different. There's more variation in IQ within groups, right? Between two white people or a whole bunch of white people than there is between a group of white people and a group of black people. So that stuff you cannot apply to individuals. You cannot. I don't think you can draft policy on that. Equal opportunities for everybody. That's true. That does not mean though that in this specific case that it's completely settled, that it's immutable, that it can't be changed.
Of course, that's nobody's saying. But of course, but nobody's saying that though. I don't understand why we mentioned that, because nobody's saying that. We know environment has a huge role.
Charles Murray says it, and Charles Murray, I got to say, by the way, many years I'm actually a big fan of Charles Murray.
You're right. He does say that. But
I've actually read him a lot. My wife is really good friends with his son. So there's a.
Here's another thing I would just wanted to.
But I just disagree with him on it. Yeah.
Yeah, but okay. But the thing is that whether he's wrong or he's wrong for he has bad intentions because he's wrong. He might be wrong because his science. He might be right. He might be wrong, but not because of bad intentions. But the people that are against him think that he's wrong, and he's being wrong because he's fucking racist, right? I don't know.
That's not true. That part of it is, I think that's bullshit. I think that's that even Ezra Klein said that's not true, even though he.
No, I think the biggest Ezra didn't say that. Ezra didn't say that.
I think the biggest problem was that very first article, which Ezra kept on
Alex,
bouncing around and ignoring.
Alex is pointing out we need to move on to another topic. I just want to point out that two people mentioned that Crypt and somebody else mentioned that Asians and Jews are shown to have a higher IQ, and Jews are one of the most discriminated groups in the world. So if
and I would also refer people to Charles Murray's article on Jewish IQ. I think it's called Jewish Genius. He wrote it a very, very long time ago. To see it. One last thing I want to mention, this is not something I typically mention, but it's actually relevant here, is that I'm part of this high IQ society called Mensa. Okay. I don't know why, but was on the receiving end.
You constantly remind us, Ali. I know.
Oh, did I? Oh, okay. I'm going to actually put it on it.
Alex, we're going to start.
Oh, by the way, it doesn't mean you guys should meet some of the people here. They're not. It's actually not.
Okay. You are very smart. All right.
I wanted to say that. On the receiving end, I've been on the receiving end of a lot of these studies, because what a lot of these people who are studying intelligence do is they do go for Mensa members. So when they go for Mensa members, you're on the receiving end and you get a very, very good idea of the stuff that is still controversial, the stuff that's actually settled, the stuff that is taboo to talk about, the stuff that is. So this is something I've been familiar with personally for over 10 years.
So let's move on to the next topic. But Alex, we are going to move to the next topic. But I don't think it's fair that you're saying we're going in circles, because we did mention a whole bunch of different things without actually repeating anything more than I don't think we went in circles. But Alex is right. We spent enough time on this. Should we go to the next one? What's the next topic? Nerds, Danielle is saying. All right, go on. Ali, did you mute yourself? Okay.
No, I didn't. I'm here. Read the next question. I thought you were going to read it. No?
Oh, I'm going to read it. I'm not good at. All right, let me see. It's steaks are tasty. He says, do you think there is a bias in skeptic. Is that the next one? Yes. Is there bias in the skeptic community
yes.
right now towards the right wingers? For example, Linda Sarsour will be, for good reasons, criticized. Yet people like Tommy Robinson. Yes, Tommy Robinson's won't be.
Oh, okay, so yeah, let me see. Sorry, I was looking in the chat, but I realized they're all here. So yeah, steaks are tasty. Let me just say that again. Do you think there is a bias in the skeptic community right now toward the right wingers? For example, Linda Sarsour will be, for good reasons, criticized, yet people like Tommy Robinson won't be. Can I take this, Armin? Really quick.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to respond to the live chat. Okay, somebody is asking in the live chat: Is this just for patrons? No, our Q&As are public, but our guest shows are live just for patrons. But
right. And one thing we want to say: we do prioritize. We go through the patrons' questions first when it comes to these public live chats. So the patrons are definitely given privileged status, if you will. So. Yeah, so this question about this, and I just actually posted something today. This is a Tommy Robinson video. So I've heard a lot of apologists talking about Tommy Robinson. And Tommy Robinson, just a couple of days ago, he posted a video where he was asking Sadiq Khan, Sadiq Khan's the mayor of London, about why he's not saying anything about all the returning ISIS fighters. Legitimate concern, something that we've all talked about, we're not happy about. None of us like the leftist apologism for this stuff. We've criticized Justin Trudeau for it here in Canada as well. But then there's another thing that Tommy Robinson goes on to say, and I'll quote him. He says, Sadiq Khan keeps on saying that it's his country and his capital. It's not your country. It's not your capital. You're part of an invasion into our country, Sadiq. It's our country. That's one thing he said. Later on, he said he invited Donald Trump to come to England, and he said, don't go to London, because London, I look around, there's it doesn't even have any British people there. Go where the real British people are. So he's essentially talking about non-whites, or immigrants. Like Sadiq Khan was born and raised in England. He was born in Tooting, South London. He was born and raised in the UK, just like Tommy Robinson is. So it's amazing to me that he's saying that it's not Sadiq Khan, it's not your country, not your capital, you're part of an invasion into our country. So to me, that is clear bigotry. And I don't think that he gets called out on it enough in the skeptic community. There seems to be there definitely seems to be a double standard to some extent when it comes to people like Linda Sarsour, who is universally and actually justifiably criticized, right, for it. But there seems to be, but there are a lot of fans of Tommy Robinson, at least in my follower count, among my followers, who tend to think that he doesn't have any of
well, that's not what I get on my feed, because what I get on my feed is mostly shitting on people like Tommy Robinson. How come you're more left than I am, and you get more anti-rights?
Because people want to fight. So the people who are against you, they're gonna come.
Because that's not what my experience at all. When I see on my feed is mostly attack on the right, attack off.
No, I have a lot of. I mean, I've been. Sorry, Armin, you had a mic problem again. What did you say?
Testing. Is that good?
Yeah. You're good. Just repeat what you said at the end.
No. I just said basically most of what I get is an attack on the right. But I do think that what I notice is that a lot of people see using words like right and left as dirty words. So it doesn't matter. Like alt-right and right seem not to make any difference for people anymore. Like as if when you're saying, oh, he's a right wing, it's apparently the same as saying he's part of the alt-right. Yeah. And when you say which is not fair. And when you say somebody is left wing, it seems to be also the same as saying there's, social justice warrior, snowflake, a professional. Yeah. I don't think any of that is fair. I think that a lot of people are on the right that are very good rational thinkers, that we disagree with on some things, but are not racist. And there are a lot of great people on the left that are not. They don't want to. They're not for PC culture, and they have a lot of good views, and they're rational thinkers that we also have disagreements with. I don't think the word right wing and left wing should be dirty words. I think people stop saying alt-right as and they're calling people right-wing as if they're the same thing. And they're left-wing, they use the left-wing as a condemnation as if it's just like a social justice warrior kind of thing. I don't think that's fair.
I think, like, for me, I mean, I'm definitely way more liberal leaning. I'm totally liberal. My association with even words like conservative is, the more backward an Islamic society was, we used to say they're very, very conservative Muslims, or they have very conservative values and so on. So I've had these associations with it, but I do agree with you, Armin. I think there are people on both sides. I think what recently has happened, though, is that all of us have been speaking about the regressive left. The regressive left was a huge problem. And during the Obama time, and we all talked about it. I wrote a whole chapter about it in my book. Armin, you've criticized it. We talked about these social justice warriors. We talked about all of these other concepts and fetishes. They kind of have political correctness. Now I think, and this is my opinion, I think the anti-regressive people and the anti-SJW people have become just as unreasonable and just as irrational as the other side.
There's always an overcorrection. To be fair, like the social justice warrior culture was a reaction to something that needed a reaction, right?
Yeah,
like it was a reaction to racism.
It still does, I think.
I mean,
I think it still does.
Yeah, it still needs a reaction, but then there's always an overreaction to stuff that needs a reaction, and then the overreaction will get its own reaction and its own overreaction, and the pendulum keeps swinging.
Right, and I got it. This is actually something I want to say. There's certain things in social justice warrior language. I mean, recently I think Sarah Haider put out a question about intersectionality, and I wanted to talk about it. Intersectionality is a real thing. It's important. If you have a trans black woman, okay, who's trans and black, or if you have LGBT black women, their experience is at the intersection of being black and being LGBT. Now, there are a lot of opportunists and leftist nuts who use that to justify any kind of stupidity they want,
like
to
what?
censor
like how
other
they
people.
Use that? Explain that.
Well, they say, like Linda Sarsour talks about intersectionality a lot. We have to talk about intersectionality.
But like, give an example of how that's used in a bad way.
Oh, they just say that like feminism, for instance, if you're feminist, you have to be pro-Palestinian, or if you're feminist, then you have to be anti-colonialism, right? That's the intersection of these, and so they use it that way, and that's actually not true at all. That's not even what intersectionality is about, but they use this term for it. Let me give you a better example that may be more familiar to people.
But can I just talk about that? If I agree that with the problem with this whole intersectionality is that we used to talk about this in much more, like, if you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, you get to this very old traditional thing that we used to call individualism.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, that's
why I'm saying it has merit. Yeah.
No, it doesn't have merit because you have to keep it you have to keep grouping people until, I mean, if you take that logic to its very end, you realize that everybody's experience is unique, and you shouldn't group people into different tribes. You should just look at people as individuals and treat each one of their experiences differently. I think what they're doing is that they're not taking this logic to the very end to actually realize that the value that we have always been fighting for is individualism.
Yeah, but I do think that there's some, it is beyond just individualism. I think it's a broader aspect of like, if you are gay and you're black and you're a woman, right? All of these things. I think that is that is an experience that a lot of people share, a large group of people share, and you can learn about all of those experiences and how they interact with each other. And there's something to learn about it. And I think that has substance. However, when it's used to shut out other people or censor people, then I think and that's what they do. Now, intersectionality is a bad word, and I don't use it myself anymore because it's associated with just stupidity. Another example I'd give is white privilege. Like, there's this idea that because white privilege has been used so much, so you have white privilege, so you can't talk about my issues. When people say that turns people off the whole idea of white privilege, and they just look at it as it's nothing. But then, you talk to people who are black people who are stopped by cops, right, in Chicago, and how they're treated, or their incarcerations versus white people. Or you look at the kind of things Trump can get away with that Obama or a woman in power would never have been able to get away with, and you realize white privilege is a real thing. It's just the way that it's used, the way that it has been overused and exploited by the social justice warrior type people, that has made it has made it meaningless. But that doesn't mean
white privilege is not a thing for every white person, though.
Oh, of course, Armin, that goes without saying. Of course, it's not.
It goes without saying for you. Not for,
that's my complaint. For a lot of people, it doesn't go without saying, right? But there are these extremes that either white privilege is the cause of everything, and that's the reason why everybody else should shut up, except for the person who's a minority and who's had a certain experience.
But or on the other end, I think white guilt, the influence of white guilt is, at some point is going to outshine the influence of
so there's the intersectionality of white guilt and white privilege. Okay, I'm kidding. I'm just fucking with you now. But I mean, I think everybody sort of, you guys understand what I'm talking about. Is that I don't think
I've never seen such larger group of self-hating group of people in anywhere in my life. Mm-hmm. But I've never seen such such a widespread hatred of your race from any group of people compared to white people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there is a backlash towards it too. And there are many things. There is racism against white people too.
This is not a small backlash. Yeah. This is huge. This is in Europe, in United States. I've the number of times white people say I can't say this because I'm white is unbelievable. I'm like, I don't have.
Remember after our event when that guy came and said that I can't say what you guys say.
So this is not a small overcorrection. This is a huge thing. This is racism, and this is a huge level of racism towards white people by white people. Mm-hmm. Don't you agree? This is huge. This is not a small thing.
Yeah,
this is not a small thing.
I don't think I think it is happening, but I think all the other stuff is happening too.
No, it's the same thing. I'm not saying there's not racism against black people.
I know you're not saying. I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you. And another thing, identity politics. People talk about how the left is engaged in identity politics, whereas every time I hear people on the right now, this whole overcorrection, all the populist movements, they're talking about European heritage, they're talking about identitarianism, they're talking about race realism, they're talking about Judeo-Christian heritage. And it's just, I mean, Lalo Degosh said something on Twitter that I loved recently, that every time somebody talks about Judeo-Christian heritage, you can guarantee they're about to say something really stupid. And it almost invariably is. And
to your point, the correction to all this white guilt is actually a new uprising of white supremacy. So there is an overreaction to that as well. So your point is right.
So I'm not.
By the way, Alex is saying that we should have an actual leftist on to discuss this. Alex, I totally agree, and we have been looking. It's really hard to get some of them on the show. If you guys have any suggestions, or if you want to go to your favorite lefties and harass them and on Twitter and tag them and tell them to come to our show, tag our show and tag them. And we'll try to get them on the show. Okay, we're looking for lefty people. It's been easier to get Muslims on this show than lefty. So help us.
One more thing on this. I think that we had a conversation about this whole identity politics thing with Sarah Hayder, and I think she brought up a lot of really good points, and I think all of us did. So we had a really good conversation there. So if you can check out that episode, you should. Can we get Ezra on this show?
The Booty man is saying get Ezra.
Let's see. I'll reach out to him. Let's see if you can.
Thomas Smith. Can we get Tom? I think Thomas.
That's what I had in mind. I wanted to get Thomas Smith on.
I think Thomas might find us too toxic to come on our show.
I don't know about that. Let's see if we can. He engaged Sargon.
You regretted that. Pac-Man would be great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. These are some great suggestions. I'm going to keep.
So let's look into that, and let's move on to the next question.
All right. Go to the next one. I'm gonna save these suggestions.
Okay. So the next question is from I think it's Cowboy 1000 or Owboy 1000. The C got cut off. I think. I know hell is not real, but being taught religion since a child, the fear part is still drilled in my brain. It's hard to get over the fear part of it that makes fear part of it, that makes sense. So I mean, I think we get the idea that hell is not real, but he still feels a fear of hell.
Yeah.
What's a question?
Do you still fear hell?
I don't fear hell. No, I actually look forward to it. Actually, I have a fun answer for people who say, aren't you afraid of going to hell? And especially like this is religious Muslims in my case. And I always tell them, I'm like, if there really is a God, and if he is more powerful, more intelligent, and more merciful than everybody else, unimaginably more merciful, then I am 100% confident that I am not going to hell. If there is a God who created all of this stuff around us, then he can't be dumber.
No, you keep saying that. You keep saying that every time I correct you. There's no guarantee that the God. Okay, if there's a God, there is no guarantee that he's not an asshole. Okay.
I don't think
everybody. Why? Everybody said
no,
like
no. I'm saying that when they talk about the religious God, when they say that there is Allah's real, I'm like, if Allah's really real and he's benevolent, and if they're talking about a benevolent,
but his definition of benevolence is different from.
It's not a serious answer, Armin. It's basically when people come and tell me, "Aren't you scared that the God?" I'm like, well, say he's benevolent. There's no way he's going to send me to.
But the reason why I fight back against this idea is because this is what a lot of Muslims that are that don't like their God, but they don't want to give up their religion, keep saying. You're like, I don't think that the God that created the galaxies and the trees and the oceans, I don't think he's gonna. Such a person would send me to hell just because I didn't worship him. And like, why would creating galaxies and stuff not make you an asshole? You could be an asshole God that creates galaxies and burns people for fun.
All right. Okay. Point taken. Anyway, so there's this in Japan, there are people that are evaporated, organization that helps change identity and disappear from their old life. Is there anything like this in Muslim countries? So people just who can if they can change your identity, and it's sort of like a witness protection program, I guess, where you can just change your identity, get a new name and everything, and move into. I don't think there's I haven't heard of anything like that in Muslim majority countries. I think that would, in many Muslim majority countries, you have dictatorships. You don't necessarily have democracies. And even when you do have democracies, I don't think they're very interested in letting some people lose their identity, and they want to keep track of everything. So I don't think that's the case.
Okay. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what I didn't understand that question.
It's
fine. Mike is saying you skipped my question. Mike, what was your question? I might have missed it. Sorry, Mike. Mike is a regular. I don't want to miss Mike's question.
Hey, cut and paste your question in again.
All right.
But in the meantime, let's move on to Jim King. He says, don't you think people still want to be part of a community? Being ex-Muslim might be a community for short term, but what about promoting an enlightenment or like community? That is what we have this podcast for, Jim, and that's why we have groups like XMNA. That's why we have groups like Muslimish. That's why we are trying to reach out not only to ex-Muslims but also to their families. When I wrote my book, I had that in mind as well. And I do talk to a lot of parents who are Muslims who have kids, and I think that we should be talking to all these audiences. I do come from the Muslim community. A lot of my relatives and friends are Muslim. So one thing I don't do is I don't shy away from the dialogue. I actually openly talk about it. It's a lot easier now that I have a book now and I have more of a public profile. And I think that really, really helps. And most of the time when I do, often I will get the odd uncle or the odd cousin coming up and saying, I kind of think like you do too. And they'll confide in me. I'm sure Armin's had the same experience. There are always people out there who have doubt. And that's the way to bring them out. I think that I think right now the coming out phase is very important. I know it's not easy for everybody. I know it's a lot easier for me to say because of my family where I live. I am very privileged as an ex-Muslim compared to many other ex-Muslims, but there are many people who are doing it, and I think that's humanizing the face of the idea of what ex-Muslims or free thinkers in the Muslim world look like. So
okay, I got Mike's question. It's down there. What is
Michael McCulloch, what is it all about Muhammad flying to the Jerusalem mosque that wasn't even built yet that time?
Wasn't there something there? I mean, it's not
Yeah.
it's not a mosque. It's not a mosque. It was the temple.
Yeah, it was a temple. It was a Dome of the Rock. It was that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was there. So that's the point
The
from which he
point,
flew.
yeah, actually, Muhammad initially, before he went to Medina, and he was disappointed by the Jews. His whole entire religion was supposed to be um, built on the Jewish religion, right? That's why Muslims don't eat pig. That's why Muslims, before they worship towards the Kaaba, they worship towards Jerusalem, right? So it wasn't a mosque there, but this was the Jewish temple there, and he was trying to convince the Jews that he's the Messiah that they're waiting for, and he thought that this will sell. And if you read the Quran, it's obsessed with Jewish stories. Moses is mentioned so many times when you read the Quran, and every time Moses, the same story again, and you're like, oh my God, again Moses. And actually, when Muhammad went to heaven and came back, as he says, he mentioned that he saw Abraham, and he said that he looks exactly like Abraham. He wants to keep convincing people that he's the Messiah that they're waiting for. But then when he went to Medina, a lot of the rules and a lot of the scripture is basically based on Jewish texts as well. And he was very pro-Jewish to begin with. But when he went to Medina, where a lot of Jews were,
It became a power struggle then.
No, and also they told him like, yeah, we're actually the guy we're waiting for is a Jew. It's not an Arab. I think Muhammad didn't have his. He knew a lot of the stories, but I think he didn't know that part of the story. And he kept telling him, "No, it's not right. You got that part wrong. Somebody changed your scripture. Your scripture has been, corrupted or something like that. Somebody, you know this is not true." But he completely misunderstood that, because the Jewish ideology is completely based on Jewish supremacy. It's a race based ideology that Jewish people are the chosen people and all that. You really think that they think that the prophet the Messiah that they're waiting for is going to be an Arab? That would not have, that shows that he completely did not understand about the chances of a success. But once this happened, he went from being very pro-Jewish to being very anti-Jewish, right? But even when he went anti-Jewish, every time a Jew became a Muslim, he was very excited, right? So his anti-Jewish feelings were not at all. If you want to give credit a little bit to Muhammad, he wasn't a racist. He was a fucking asshole that killed a lot of Jews. But his problem with them was more theological. It was not based on race, because it had nothing to do with their race. But he did kill a lot of Jewish people.
So we have about 15 minutes. So I wanted to quickly knock out a couple of really quick questions
right,
on Twitter as well. Okay. So one is, how close are you all following the Iran protests, and do you have any special insights?
Wait, did you finish the live chat questions?
No. I'm just bringing this up because it's a very quick answer. And the quick answer to that is about the Iran protests. Our first episode this year in 2018, the inaugural episode, is a whole special on the Iran protests. And Armin has actually given a lot of commentary on it that's very valuable, that I think that
it has taken a huge new turn. If you guys want, we could have an episode on it. Are you still there?
Yeah. And I think the same thing about the MBS in Saudi Arabia. We do have an episode that we're thinking about planning.
Right, yeah, somebody asked about that topic. MBS.
And we discussed it in the last one too.
Also, Gene also wanted to know about if we're gonna talk about the people in Saudi that are thrown in jail. I think we should have a Saudi Arabia special. Gene, we're gonna have, because you mentioned this, let's dedicate an entire episode on MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and Saudi Arabia, and the situation with the activists there.
I agree.
Right?
And I can. There are also some updates when it comes to Raif Badawi and everything else. So
maybe we should invite somebody from Saudi Arabia back as well. Maybe Qada or somebody.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia. We actually have this guy I've been trying to have a conversation with for a while. The only problem is Saudi Arabia tends to really, really screw up communications if you're having lengthy conversations. So if we're on Skype, they'll knock him off after every 10 minutes. If we're on WhatsApp, same kind of thing. So we're just trying to figure out a medium in which we can have that conversation. And this is a young LGBT youth in Saudi Arabia who's been living there, and we really want to have him on the show, and he's very willing to come on, but we're just trying to figure out how to do it. And as soon as we do, we're getting very close. And when we do,
by the way, Crypt is asking a question that is actually very so. Crypt is asking in the live chat: do you think if there is a revolution in Iran, will it be a form of ethno-nationalism instead of a democratic or something worse like a coup by RGC? First of all, Crypt, that's a very good question. I don't even know if I answer it, if people would understand what you're asking, but that's a very good question. And in fact, I think we should have an episode. I'm interested in having an episode about religious ethno-nationalism, the new rise of religious ethno-nationalism. And this covers three areas, which is Hindu nationalism in India, and Zoroastrianism, Aryan ethno-nationalism in Iran, which seems to be the main competition to Islam, unfortunately, in Iran, which is actually, you're right, Krip, it worries me that if there is a government fall in Iran, I don't know if we're going to like what we're going to get. But it's a very good question, Krip. And also the third one would be, I don't know if it's as big of a deal, the Viking ideology with a lot of white supremacists in Europe. It's very interesting that these things are happening in all these areas. It seems like a lot of ethno-nationalists go, instead of abandoning religion, they will go to ancient religions in their area and claim that as part of their identity, as a way to get their identity back. And as a way to fight whatever new forces is coming into their country, or whatever new forces has come into the country in the past couple of years. In Europe is actually, it seems to be both. Actually, there's a little bit resurgence of interest in Christianity as the identity of Europe, Western countries, but there's also a deep interest in Viking ideology, which is more ancient, which is more in line with the other Iran and India. Sarah pointed out, by the way, Sarah Haider pointed out that this is similar to the people using Viking ideology in Europe. But we should talk about that in an episode, maybe. I think it's a good topic. Religious ethno-nationalism, using religion as a way to get back your identity. By the way, Voltron512 just used the super chat function. That's very kind. We just got $5 donation. Thank you so much. That's very sweet. And the comment that is highlighted is: the greatest ex-Muslim I know of is Mossad Hassan Youssef. Wondering what you know of him. He hasn't made any recent appearances.
I know what I know. You know him, Armin? Have you heard of him?
No.
Okay, maybe. So he's actually one of the. He's a son of, I don't know all the details. He's a son of one of the people in the Hamas leadership in Palestine, and he basically became he started helping Israeli authorities in their fight against the terrorists and the insurgents in
I see his pictures. So, I've seen his pictures. Yeah.
Okay, right. So what he did was he converted to Christianity. He was baptized, I think, and. Yeah, I think that's about all I know of him. I actually don't know that much, so I can't really comment too much.
Let's look into it, and if he's and if it's possible, is it possible to get him on the show?
Let's see if we can talk to him. I know that even though he converted to Christianity, he's fairly secular. He's not a fan of religion. So I think when he first converted, okay, this is me speculating. I think he was religious when he first converted, but I think he's gone to the point where he is now quite. He has said a lot of things against religion in general. How it,
people in the live chat seem to be worried about him because they say like they haven't heard from him.
He's disappeared. Yeah. Well, I don't know.
If anybody that is listening to this later when we put this podcast out and it goes out on if you guys know about it, please know what's going on, please message us, either tweet at Ali or myself. By the way, we need to get somebody to check our inbox, because we check our Facebook page, we check our Twitter, we check the Patreon page, but we're behind on our emails. All right. So sorry, guys, for whoever emails.
Okay. So
but yeah,
I have.
But thank you so again for using the super chat function. That's very kind. Anyways, go on. What was you going to
say? And sorry, did you get the one from Jindy about I'm a Saudi atheist and I know many people in Saudi that were thrown in jail for their opinion?
I said we're going to dedicate an entire episode to that, which is a very good point. Thank you so much for Jindy for saying it. There was another last one by
Sagan Worshipper. So have you watched any of Jordan Peterson's word salad videos, i.e. his Bible series? Thoughts on him in general?
Oh my God. I want to pull my hair out every time I listen
I think some people might be familiar with my views on it. Here's first of all, the things I like about Jordan Peterson is that I do think that he's right about a lot of things. I think he's right about when it comes to compelled speech and all of that. I think some of his fears about the Canadian government coming in and forcing him or putting him in jail for not using the right words was misplaced. And it didn't turn out to be the case because the bill he was protesting has long become law and nothing like that's really happened as people predicted it wouldn't happen. But that's how he became famous. He did follow me on Twitter. He was supportive, and he
retweets me a lot. So I feel bad for saying bad.
Yeah. So no, but that's one thing that I really like about him, and I have to say this, and I've said this publicly, that he's very willing to engage people who disagree with him. He actually wrote to me when his book came out. He said, "I'd like to send you a copy of my book." He sent it to me to my home address here in Toronto. So I do really appreciate that, and I from what I've heard, I think he's a really nice guy. The problem is that when it comes to his ideas, I feel like he is, when you first go to university and you're studying, you do a philosophy course and you meet the philosophy professor and they're name dropping all these people like Kant and Foucault and everything. And you're just like, wow, this guy knows everything. And he just totally impresses you. Then later on, you get into the ideas more, and then you advance, you become more comfortable with it, and then you meet other people, and then you realize, okay, there was an initial infatuation. He reminds me of that kind of guy. He's very, very articulate, but
he's very, very.
Yeah, but I feel like and he's a very good public speaker, and I do. My criticism of his, a lot of his I've written.
I mean, like he's really good at saying something that doesn't mean much and making it sound profound.
Yeah. And here's I just want to give one of my pet peeves with him.
Yeah. Somebody. Oh, do I still have you, Ali?
Postmodern. Yeah. I'm here. Do you have me?
By the way, somebody compared to him. Steaks are tasty. Are saying he's like as articulate as Deepak Chopra. Yeah,
that's exactly. So I made that comparison about a year ago.
Oh, he did?
I got slammed for it. Yeah, and since then I've noticed everybody's making that comparison, and I think that he's a very articulate version of Deepak Chopra. I think that's exactly how I would say. And here I just want to give a quick example of it. So Jordan Peterson is somebody who rails against postmodernism, right? He's just really, really hates it. He says it's pretty much.
It's funny because he hates postmodernism, and he all of a sudden says different things can mean different. Like, oh, God could be is God fiction or real? Why not both? What a postmodernist thing to say, isn't it? Like,
right. So one of the things that he said in his podcast with Sam Harris is, he rails against postmodernism, but then he said this quote. Well, I would say that I don't think facts are necessarily true. So I don't.
That's the summary.
So I don't. Yeah. So I don't think that scientific facts, even if they are correct from within the domain that they were generated, I don't think that necessarily makes them true. And if you hear the whole conversation, he really talks about how things are only true if they have some evolutionary benefit. So there is I think there's a disconnect there. I also recently.
Okay, guys. Here's the thing. Here's his idea. If you can't clean up your own room, then you can't expect to go change the whole world and be an activist. I'm pretty sure I could think of a whole bunch of activists that had a huge influence in history that haven't cleaned up their room. Do you think Genghis Khan cleaned up his own room? Do you think? I don't understand. Like, really, he says like we have to clean up. He says that as something so profound. Oh, if you don't clean up your own room and it's messy, how could you fix the whole world. There are a lot of people that know politics, they know how to influence people, they know how to speak, but they can't make an omelet. They can't. They're messy. They're terrible at personal finance. There are some economists that know how to fucking manage the country's finances, and they have the best theories, but they can't manage their own personal finances. It's completely possible. I don't know. But it sounds profound to people. I don't know, like this idea, like, the idea of Jesus Christ, this whole story is a sacrifice. So it's a sacrifice to show, like, we have to care about our future. If it's the things that he makes it seem like this was such a profound story that was written in a way that teaches us something that only he's getting, I think, and everyone else is getting it from him, because nobody else has read it that way before until he mentioned it to us. So if that was the message, it was written really poorly. But all the historians of the Bible, like if you read Bart Ehrman, they can tell you that no, this is not. You can see how human and how insignificant and how childish the ideas behind what's in the Bible, why things are in and how political are the reason behind why different verses made it into the Bible, right?
Right. And I don't know if you guys can see my...
No, you can't show anything because this is going to go into our podcast and people can't see what you're showing.
Oh, okay, they can't. But I mean, generally, some of the I also tweeted some of the figures from Maps of Meaning, and this is another problem with the postmodernism thing. I can't really describe the diagrams, but I'll put a link to it in the description. So
Daniel is saying Armin is sitting on a pile of dirty clothes right now. Actually, I'm very lucky to have my wife, and that would be true. And I know this sounds very sexist to say, but this we are very stereotypical like that. My wife is, I don't know how she does it, but she manages everything in the house, and I'm shitty at it, right? I'm really shitty at cleaning up the house, but I live in a very organized environment because I was lucky to have a wife like that. But go on.
Yeah, so I mean that's basically what I have to say. Is there anything else? We've got a couple of minutes. Just
but here's the thing. Jordan Peterson, no matter how nice he is, and I appreciate the fact that he brought attention to some human rights violations in Islamic countries, even though and that's very you could give credit to that, and at the same time saying I think it's very dangerous that the Bible and Christianity is dying slowly. Like, it's becoming less and less significant and less. I mean, it's still a big fucking deal, unfortunately, but it was losing its influence slowly. And then you have somebody like Jordan Peterson comes and makes it relevant, and people believe that this is some profound messages, and they read between the lines and they think like they figured out something that this book is saying that it's absolutely not saying, right? And I think he needs to be challenge. And if you guys go check out Pangburn Philosophy's events, by the way, full transparency, I also work at Pangburn Philosophy. Sam is being in many events. Sam and Jordan Peterson are going to go head to head, and I'm really hoping that Sam is not going to let him get away with a lot of this bullshit. It's very looking forward to the events that they set up. It's very hard. A lot of people wanted to see Sam and Jordan Peterson on the panel, and there's a lot of that is coming up with Penguin Philosophy.
Okay. All right. So I think that's. Is there anything else you see? I think we have time for one more. We can do one more question.
Yeah.
And
a lot of Peterson's rhetoric is just.
If you have.
So, why do you guys think more Latinos in the United States are converting to Islam? What the fuck is that? Is that I don't know. Is that true, Alex? Is that true? That's scary. Fuck.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but if it is,
yeah.
Holy shit.
So, anyway, I'll just end with this one from Ubaid. Who?
Ubaid is here.
No, he sent this on Twitter. I know he's a supporter and a patron.
He's a patron.
But since it wasn't the other one, I missed it, so I want to make sure that it's there. And Ubaid, obviously, we're huge fans of his, and he was one of the early guests on our show. So he says, if you remember Sam Harris, lots of Sam Harris stuff coming today. If you remember Sam Harris talking about the narrative with how Herculean the task of having a dialogue has become, do we need to have a conversation to figure out how to have the dialogue? This is so meta, Obaid. Thank you.
By the way, Sang is telling you that the second T in Toronto is silent. Please correct or leave the city.
Yeah, this is one of those weird things where people say, is it Toronto or Toronto? And people in the US often say Toronto, and people here say Toronto, even though for everything else that has two T's, it's the other way around. So that is a phenomenon. I don't know if it has a name.
Did you answer Obaid's question, or did I interrupt you?
I mean, he was talking about whether we need to have a conversation about to address the narrative. So I actually
is this the same thing people are saying? What is it? Metaphoric facts, or like what is it?
Well,
what is it people say about some facts that are useful?
I don't really know exactly what it's about, but I don't know what he's getting at. So that's why I was like, okay, I just thought it was a funny question. I think that. Just generally with conversations, one thing that I really liked about the Sam Harris Ezra Klein conversation, apart from the topic and the IQ stuff and all that other crap, is that I actually like the way they engaged. No, I mean, I know, but I think that the way that they
but okay, the way they engaged was very civil and very good. But
not only that. I'm not just talking about that. Armin, hold on. Let me just finish.
Okay.
So what I liked about that is that it actually. It made me think about a lot of other things. Like what do we mean by identity politics? Are we going to use this as a blank term, or is this some places where identity politics is justified? This is a conversation we had with Sarah Hager as well, right? And I think that that was a good point. I think the idea of how two people can come from very different places, I don't think either of them was acting in bad faith. I really don't. And I think that both of them just had a genuine disagreement. That's how I took it. And again, I've seen the discourse around this later on, like the people who love Ezra Klein, like, oh my God, he wiped the floor with Sam. The people who like Sam, like, Sam was obviously the right one here. And I actually, I know Sam a lot better than Ezra. I agree with Sam Harris a lot more than I agree with Ezra Klein, but overall I do have respect for both of them. And I think that it was a really good conversation that I learned a lot from. I think we should have more people.
I'm going to criticize you here, because I don't think you need to say that, because you're kind of suggesting if I say Ezra was wrong, right? That doesn't mean that it wasn't a good conversation. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have conversations with Ezra. You could, you know what I mean? Like that adjustment does not need to be made. Somebody okay, so person A could go up against person B. And I could.
Oh, I get what you're saying. That's not what I'm getting at.
It could be true that person A wiped the floor with person B, and at the same time, while that's true, it was a good conversation, and it was and person B brought a lot of good points, and person B is a good person, and we need to have more people like person B. These things could be true at the same time.
No. That's in general. I'm talking about person B. I'm talking in this specific conversation, as I said before, and I know we disagree with this. I don't think that.
I think your respect for person B shouldn't make you want to give them more credit.
Well, not only the credit, but I, as I said before, and I know we disagree on this, I do think that Ezra Klein was right about a lot of things. I think Sam was right about a lot of things, and we already went through that, so I don't want to. I don't want to get into it again. But what I'm saying just generally about having these conversations about how to have the conversation is, I think, really important. And I, by the way, I am not a fan of, I know that a lot of people talk about building bridges and finding common ground. I think that's great if you're a politician and you need to draft legislation. But in general discourse, I'm not a fan of that. I don't think that should be the goal, building bridges and finding common ground. I think finding out where the other person is coming from, and
we also need to talk about how we talk about other people going after each other. And I think that trying to say, like, I don't agree with people, I don't think we need to find a middle ground if somebody is obviously right and the other person is obviously right.
And I don't do that. It's just in this case, I actually do think that
I really don't understand how, because he wasn't.
There are many other conversations where I think that, like, when
even if he was saying things that were true, he wasn't addressing what the conversation was about, right? You could ask me a question and I could be like, yeah, the sun rises every morning. I'm still technically right, but it has nothing to do with the conversation.
No, but we're seeing this completely differently. I think this is another sort of Ezra Sam type situation. No, but we're seeing this completely different. Look, if there are many, I am not the kind of person who's going to look at the say Sam's conversation with Ben Shapiro and say that, oh, I think that it was a good conversation, and both of them were they made good points. I thought Ben Shapiro was full of shit in that conversation. I still think it was a good conversation. So I do think that everyone wiped the floor with Ben Shapiro in that conversation. But the in this case, in this specific one, I found this genuinely tough. I found it difficult to. And I know that there was a lot of taking sides on this. This is not something I actually learned.
I'm not taking side because we're on someone's side. I'm taking sides because he was absolutely wrong and Sam was absolutely right. I think he wasn't. Well, I mean, even if he was right, the things that he said has nothing to do with what Sam was saying. Sam was saying this is the data. It was like, but what about this? But what about that? Like, okay, yes. What about those?
I think Sam was right about much more. I think that Ezra Klein was right about a lot of stuff, and he was very wrong when it came to being evasive about the whole the first Nisbet article. But I also think, for example, I think that where Ezra had a better point than Sam, in my opinion, is when they talked about identity politics. I don't think that term should be brought about. I do think that there's legitimate aspects to it. So that's just one example.
Right. Actually, you're right. Actually, no. I give to that. I think like that. We agreed with that. So Sam hates a concept of identity politics, and identity politics have been used very, very in a toxic way. But I agree that if you're an ex-Muslim in a Muslim country, if you're a Jew in a Nazi country, if you're a Yazidi under ISIS, then your identity, or if you're Christian in Egypt, then your identity does matter. And I don't know if using that identity to ask for help, I don't know if that's considered identity politics or not. But if it is, then in those scenarios, that identity politics is fair to play. So I'm not willing to completely dismiss it. But in that sense, I agree.
Anyway, yeah. So I don't. For me, it wasn't about. I actually don't really have the topic of the conversation. I don't care about as much as I think that
I do care about the topic of the conversation a lot, because if you don't talk about this,
I know you do. I'm just telling you that in my case, I'm talking about my opinion here. Is that I don't care particularly about the topic of that conversation, just because I've been reading about it for 10 years. And I remember when the bell curve came out. I was in med school at the time. It was all very, I
now it's more important because now it's going to become undeniable. And
the other thing is that I think that one thing Sam Harris is saying is reputation destroying. I think that Sam's reputation is very good. I think it's very established. Andrew Sullivan, who is another guy
I agree with you.
Andrew Sullivan is another guy I've been reading since the early 2000s. Right, is somebody who has brought up this topic a lot, like the IQ and genetics thing, and he's taken Charles Murray's side every time, and he's repeatedly talked about it. He's gotten flack for it, but his reputation is untarnished just because he's been talking about it. I don't think that this is going to affect that. So the topic, because I'm familiar with it, I don't really
Lady Liberty with a dick is saying, well, that's a very cool username. It's saying, I think Sam should take Ezra's advice and have on more people of color who agree with Ezra. Actually, I disagree with that lady. No, I completely you agree with that?
I completely agree with that.
I completely disagree.
Armin, we did. Like, I know we've had this conversation.
Hey, we're talking on the phone. I'm gonna have you on my show, but before I decide whether you're gonna be on my show or not, can you tell me from a scale of 1 to 10 how dark you are before I have you on my show? Like,
you're simplifying it. You're simplifying. That's not what it is.
That's not what it is. No, that's what it is. It has no relevance. It has no relevance. Your color has no relevance.
No, so that's where I disagree with you, and I disagree with Sam as well.
Okay, let's talk about that later.
We'll talk about that later. And I know we've talked about this off the air too before. So I think that the experiential and the story part of it, that part of it is also.
By the way, people in the live chat, Sagan Worshipper, Lady Liberty with a dick, Francis, Crypt, Mike, you guys were awesome. I really liked how active our live chat was today. Jim, Beej, as always, Sang, Bert, and everybody else. And thank you again to our patrons. Really appreciate you guys making all this possible. Make sure if you're a patron to look for our private Facebook patron only group is linked. We have a link to it on our Facebook page, Secular Jihadist Facebook page. But just make sure you please don't ask to join if you're not a patron, because it makes it really difficult for me to go over because if you're not, then I have to message you. It makes everything a little bit longer. But thank you so much to our patrons. And yeah, and also guys, subscribe to the YouTube channel, because that really does help get the videos to more people. You can and if you could comment on them, here's how you could help. Actually, if you're not a patron, you could leave us a review on iTunes, or you could go on our YouTube channel and make your suggestions for our future shows, for our future guests, future topics as a comment in our YouTube videos, because the comments really helps us get more exposure on YouTube as well. Thank you guys. Thank you everyone. And yeah, Ali, anything else to say?
Yeah, I just want to say that for those of you who are listening live, we're going to have our Mariam Namazi. Will be talking to her on April 23rd when I get back from the Netherlands, and I'm really looking forward to that. It should be a fun conversation.
Yeah, and I'm gonna look forward to XMNA's release of my talk with Qada and Sarah. I'll share it on my Twitter and Atheist Republic when that comes. That was very interesting. Thank you for bringing that up, Ali. By the way.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
All right, and
goodbye, everyone.
I think that's it. Okay, bye, everybody. Until next time.